Parshas Devarim is a very, very perplexing parsha. It seems to be that what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing in his farewell address is giving a review of the history of the Jews' travels through the Midbar. But it's a very selective review. He makes no reference to the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus itself, not to the splitting of the Red Sea, not to the giving of the Torah. The account begins with the Jews' departure from Har Sinai. They were encamped at Har Sinai for a little less than a year, 10 days less than a year. They came on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and they departed the next year on the 20th of Iyar, so it's 10 days less than a year. And at Har Sinai, they received the divine command to break camp, move forward, to conquer Eretz Israel. And that's where Moshe Rabbeinu's review begins. And he mentions a very curious thing, that at that time, he says, at that time, I told you that I can't bear the responsibility of leadership myself. You're a populous nation, a very strong-willed nation, can't do it myself, and therefore I'm going to appoint subordinate judges. And the Torah devotes a number of psukim to describing Moshe Rabbeinu's plan and the people's agreement to the plan, and so on and so forth. And we pointed out yesterday that there's a technical problem over here, because the idea of appointing subordinate judges, according to Chazal, was given by Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day after Yom Kippur. The day after Yom Kippur. So it's quite a long time before the command was given to break camp. Again, the command to break camp was given on the 20th of Iyar. So we're talking about from the 10th of Tishrei to the 10th of Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevei, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar. Quite a number of months. And the idea of appointing subordinate judges came along before the command to break the camp. And here the Torah seems to say differently. The Torah seems to say that God gave Moshe the command to break camp, and at that time, Moshe Rabbeinu appointed the subordinate judges. Now, the Malbim in Parshas Yisro offers a very elegant solution. He says that it's true that Yisro gave the advice all the way back then, the day after Yom Kippur, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't act on it until God gave the command to break camp and march on to Eretz Israel. Which is a very curious thing, that Moshe Rabbeinu heard what Yisro said, but he didn't act on it for about 7 months. Seems rather perplexing. But this is what the Malbim says, and therefore there's no contradiction. It's true that Yisro gave Moshe the advice the day after Yom Kippur. Moshe acted upon it after God gave him the command to break camp and march on to Eretz Israel, which was 7 months later in the month of Iyar. That's what the Malbim understands. Okay, perhaps we'll give an explanation why Moshe Rabbeinu waited 7 months. The Ramban says differently. The Ramban says that it's true that in a chronological sense, the idea of appointing judges took place before. Moshe Rabbeinu is mentioning it here, not because he wants to give us a strict chronological history, but thematically, this is a relevant point. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is leading into his recounting the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. And the sin of the spies was really a tremendous setback for the Jewish people. If you think about it for a second, the Jews would have marched triumphantly into Eretz Israel, and instead, as a consequence of the debacle of the Meraglim, it was decreed that the Jews should wander in the desert for a total of 40 years. So it's really a terrible catastrophe. So the Ramban says that the point that Moshe Rabbeinu wants to make is this, that it was perfect. Everything was in place. everything was in place. We had received the Torah. We had been given the divine command to march on to Eretz Yisrael. It would have been just a number of days. Even the judges were in place. So everything was set up. Everything was perfect. And you see what a catastrophe was caused by the sin of the Meraglim. So the Ramban says that when Moshe Rabbeinu mentions the judges, it isn't because this is exactly when it happened. Really, Moshe appointed the judges long before. The point he's trying to make is that look how terrible, what the terrible consequences of the sin were. That it was perfect. It was ideal. Everything was in place. Even the judges were in place. The leaders were in place. And look what the sin of the Meraglim did. Now again, it seems that there's something that we're not catching from this Ramban. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to make a case that the kilkul, the ruination that was caused by the Chet HaMeraglim was awful. And Moshe makes the point that it was perfect. Everything was arranged. He even had the judges. I mean, all the things he could have mentioned. Why are the judges so important? And of course, the poignance of the words of the Ramban become evident when we remind ourselves of a Rashi in the beginning of Parsha Shoftim, which is really a few weeks from now. So it's about 48 weeks ago. But it's coming up in a few weeks. In Parsha Shoftim, there we have the mitzvah of appointing judges. It says, Shoftim v'shotrim titnu l'chol b'chol sharecha. That when you come into Eretz Yisrael, you should appoint judges in all your cities. Asher Hashem l'kacha nos l'chol shvatach, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to your tribes. V'shoftu asa'am mishpat tzedek, and they shall judge the people properly. Lo sater mishpat, don't pervert justice. Lo saker panim, don't show favoritism. Lo tikach sheichat, don't take bribes. And the pasuk says that why is this? What is the reason for this mitzvah? Leman tichya, so that you should live. V'yarashta es haaretz, and inherit the land. Asher Hashem elokecha nos l'ch, that God gives you. And Rashi says in those words, what does it mean? You should appoint judges in order to live and inherit the land. So Rashi says, Kedai hu minui hadayonim aksherim, that the merit of appointing proper judges is enough lahachios es Yisrael, to sustain the Jewish people, ulaheshivan al admasan, and to firmly plant them on their land. That's what the pasuk says. That appoint judges l'man tichya, in order that you should live, v'yarashta es haaretz, and inherit the land. So Rashi says, it's really Chazal in the Sifri, say that from here we see that the merit of appointing proper judges is the merit which gives us life and allows us to reign firmly and planted in Eretz Yisrael. Keeping that in mind, go back to the Ramban. That's the Ramban says, that's Moshe Rabbeinu's point. Everything was in place. We even had the judges. We know from Chazal that Minoi Hadayanim, appointing proper judges, is the merit which allows us to possess Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe is making the case, a beautiful case. Look what the Chet HaMeraglim did. Everything was perfect. We even had the judges in place, which is the great schus, the great merit which allows us to maintain possession of Eretz Yisrael. And you see the Chet HaMeraglim ruined everything. I understand, what is this great schus? Why is Minoi Hadayanim, why is the appointing of the judges such a tremendous schus, that this is like the merit that enables us to maintain possession of Eretz Yisrael? Can you put that on the back burner? Again, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu's review of the history, after we have the appointment of the judges, Moshe Rabbeinu recounts the sin of the Meraglim. The spies were sent, they came back with an evil report, the people were discouraged. They, in a sense, rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, they wanted to go back to Egypt. So it was decreed upon them to wander in the desert 40 years. The Torah tells a story about a group of people who decided to do tshuva, and they said that we're going to go and conquer the land. We're going to repent for our lack of faith, for our rejection of Eretz Yisrael. And Moshe warned them, said, don't go, because God is not with you. It's too late, you can't turn the clock back. And they went on nevertheless, and the Amori came down from the mountain, they swooped down, and they decimated them. Then, fast forward to the end of the 40 years, and Moshe Rabbeinu recounts events which really took place just a matter of months before. The Jews encountered various nations. They approached Edom, and Edom would not give them a free passage through their land, and the Jews were inclined to fight for passage, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no, don't wage war with Edom because they are your brothers. Edom, of course, comes from Esav. And the Jews turned aside, and they came to the nation of Moab, and again, they were going to fight, and Hashem said, Al Totzeres Moab, don't fight with Moab. Kilo etten l'cham li'artzo, their land is off limits. It was given to the sons of Lot as an inheritance, and then they came to the nation of Ammon. Again, they're inclined to fight. God says, no, don't wage war against Ammon, because as well, that was given as an inheritance to the sons of Lot. And then we have the successful wars against Sichon and Og. And again, it's a very odd thing. There were a lot of very memorable things that occurred during the 40 years in the Midbar. But these don't seem to be so interesting, noteworthy, and in any case, they're quite recent. So why does Moshe Rabbeinu feel that he wants to relate these events? Last night, we spoke about this, gave an approach. But tonight, I think the issue will be here is this. Moshe Rabbeinu has brought the Jews to the threshold of Eretz Yisrael. So if you were Moshe Rabbeinu, and you're speaking to the Jewish people, what would you talk about? What would you talk about? And what is the message that you want to transmit to the Jewish people just at this juncture? Now Rashi understands that the whole parsha are divrei teichachais. They are words of rebuke. And Rashi is really coming to grapple with this question. As Rashi quotes the Chazal, which say that the most appropriate time for giving teichacha is right before your death. That's the most appropriate time. First of all, if not now, when? You only can push it off so long. So if the person is facing death, this is a good time to put in his last teichacha. And many other considerations Rashi brings from Chazal. So why does Rashi understand that we're divrei teichachais? Because otherwise it's hard to understand. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu wait until this point to give this drasha? It must be that they're divrei teichacha, and divrei teichacha are most appropriate before passing. But there may be another answer to the question. Because it would seem to me that a very important thing for Moshe Rabbeinu to do at this juncture would be to explain to the Jewish people the legitimacy of their claim to Eretz Yisrael. As we're at the Jordan, we're about to cross into the Promised Land. What is our right to the Promised Land? Is it legitimate? Do we have a right to it? Is it just that we're stronger? So might makes right? But I would think this is a very important subject. Moshe Rabbeinu should want to explain to the Jewish people the legitimacy of their claim. Now it's interesting to note that Rashi, back in Parshas Bereshis, understands that the legitimization of our claim to Eretz Yisrael is such a fundamental idea that in fact it is the first thing the Torah talks about. It's an amazing thing. That the Torah begins with Bereshis bara Elokim eisa shamayim ve'eisa haaretz. That God created the world. So ask anybody, and they would tell you, well, why does Torah begin with that? Well, first of all, because it is the beginning, right? You want to start at the beginning, that's the beginning. God created the world. And that God is the creator of all things is the very definition of what God is. It's the defining aspect of God, that God is the source of existence. That's what we would have said. Comes Rashi, and Rashi says no. that the Torah is not a book of theology. So the Torah would not begin with the creation story to tell us anything about God. The Torah is a book of laws, and therefore it should have begun with the first mitzvah, which is Achayish Azalochem, Rosh Chodashim, the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, which is the first of the mitzvahs that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. So why does it begin with Bereshis? So Rashi says an amazing thing, brings the pasuk in Tehillim, which says, Kayach Masov Higid La'amo Losais Lahem Nachlas Ugoyim. That God informed his nation of his mighty acts in order to give them the inheritance of the nations. In other words, if the nations of the world come and say that you are bandits, you are robbers, you're thieves, you've stolen Eretz Yisrael from the earlier occupants, we say no, that God created the world and he gives it to whoever he sees fit. For a time he gave it to them, after a time he took it away from them and gave it to us. This is the basis of our claim. And that's why the Torah tells us that God created the world to justify our claim to Eretz Yisrael. This land is God's land, and he gives it to who he sees fit. And since he gave it to us, our claim is legitimate. That's what Rashi says. So why does the Torah begin with the creation story? Not because it's theologically significant, says Rashi, because it is the basis of our claim to Eretz Yisrael. And that is the very first thing the Torah wants to bring out, that our claim to Eretz Yisrael is legitimate. Now just as far as Pshat in that Rashi, we pointed out many times, that what does this mean? That if the Ummah Ha'olam, with the nations of the world, say that we're thieves, we can prove that our claim is just. How? We'll pull out our Chumash and Rashi and say, look, it says here that God created the world and he gave it to us. And what if the people that make the accusations don't believe in our Bible? But it's clear that the Pshat in Rashi is this. It's not that we're going to use the Chumash or use the Rashi to persuade our antagonists. That's not going to work. The problem is this. The problem is that when we hear people's critique, we begin to believe it ourselves. And after a while, we begin to question our own rights. Well, maybe they're right. Maybe they are right. Now, they repeat it often enough, again and again and again and again. Maybe they have a point. Maybe we aren't just. Maybe we're imperialists. Maybe the state of Israel is just a consequence of the guilt of the Western countries in the aftermath of the Holocaust and so on and so forth. And they took it from the indigenous population just because they were able to do it. And somehow they were able to soothe their guilt by giving the Jews a homeland. And after a while, we begin to believe it ourselves. So therefore, says Rashi, that's why we have a Chumash, that's why I have a Torah. Because the Torah, if we learn the Torah is the basis for our legitimate claim to Eretz Yisrael. If you're a Jew without the Torah, I don't know, it's hopeless. Whereas if you are a Jew and you don't have access to the Torah, or you don't accept the legitimacy of Torah itself, then I don't know what you're going to do. Because when they begin to question your rights, what are you going to answer back? It's only a matter of time. You'll begin to believe what they're saying, and you'll become a self-hating Jew. And sadly, we've seen this happen to many, many Jews. Exactly as Rashi warns us. But we, Baruch Hashem, we have a Torah, we accept the Torah, we recognize it as being valid, so it confirms the legitimacy of our claim. So this is a very important thing. So I would think this is a very, very important thing to Moshe Rabbeinu as well. But if Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to the Jews just at the threshold to Eretz Yisrael, he should also want to make this point, especially keeping in mind that Mishnah Torah is the review of the Torah. So if the first thing that the Torah talks about is the legitimacy of our claim to Eretz Yisrael, what should the first thing in Mishnah Torah, what should the first thing in the review of the Torah be? Also a discussion of the legitimacy of our claim to Eretz Yisrael. So I would think that's something that Moshe Rabbeinu should talk about. Okay, so what are the elements that we need to have in place to justify our claim to Eretz Yisrael? So first, as Rashi told us, we have to believe that God created the world. Okay, it's very important. If God didn't create the world, then obviously God is also a thief. Now, it sounds facetious, but let's remind ourselves, what is the prevalent counter-belief to our belief? What do the pagans believe, as opposed to what the Jews believe? So we tend to think, oh, they believe in many gods, we believe in one God. But that's not the main difference. We've found many times that if you study the mythologies of the nations, the ancient Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, etc., you discover that all their mythologies begin with myths about the creation of the gods. Meaning there was a primordial universe, there was a universe that always was, and from this universe the gods were spawned, the gods emerged, and so on and so forth. So to them, the God is not the source of existence, the God is part of the pre-existing world. So if God would take something from one group and give it to another group, the accusation of thievery could be leveled against God himself. So it's only if God is the source of existence can we say that he's there for the legitimate owner and he can give it to whoever he wants. But if God is not the source of existence, if God is of the world, then the same accusation that they make that we're thieves can be made against God himself. So the first thing is we have to have this conception of God. It's not just we believe in a God, we believe in the Jewish definition of God as God being the source of existence. The fact that he is the source of existence means that he's by definition the owner. If he's the owner, he can give it to whoever he wants. But there's also something else. We also have to have a respect for the legitimacy of law. In other words, if we buy into the proposition that might makes right, then anyone can take our land on that basis. And what are we going to say? That it's not fair, it's not just. You can't just take it away because they're stronger. What do you mean you can't take it away because they're stronger? Don't you ever do the same thing? In other words, if a Jew succumbs to the temptation of believing that might makes right, that title can be conferred just by taking possession of something by force because you're stronger, it cuts both ways. In the same way that we take it from people that are weaker, people that are stronger can take it away from us. So it's not enough to recognize that there is a God. It has to be that we are very scrupulous in only taking that which God gives us. But if we begin to illegitimately take and make the argument that our strength gives us the right, then it's hypocritical to object when people that are stronger take it away from us. You know, if you think about it for a second, when the first settlers came from North America and they took the land from the native peoples, really it would be hypocritical to be indignant. The native peoples would fight back. I mean, if you take it away from them because you believe that your superior strength gives you a right, so if the tables are turned and now they're stronger, they have the right. Right? So if you want to firmly possess the land, your claim to it has to be not on the basis of strength, it has to be on the basis of law. I think that this really is the crux. This is the crux of the Chet HaMeraglim, when you think about it. Now, there's a very famous interpretation of the Netziv on the story of the Meraglim, and when we reflect on it for a moment, I think we'll see it in a new light. There's a basic question. When the Jews came and they said they wanted to send spies, so was that itself a sin? At that point, were they guilty of a sin? Or was it only later when the spies came back with a negative report and they lacked faith and they slandered the land, that's when they sinned? But perhaps the sending of the spies itself was legitimate. So this is a machlokas, this is a dispute among the commentaries. Rashi seems to say that The very sending of the spies wasn't a good idea. That itself was a sin. What do you send spies? So, if God says Eretz Yisrael is good, then you should rely on God. There's a medrash which seems to say this, a very, very interesting medrash. The medrash says that the Jews requesting Meraglim is comparable to the following. Imagine there was a young man who wanted to get married. And his father comes to him and says, I found the perfect girl for you. She's marvelous. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's rich. Everything is everything. So the boy says, good, I'll meet her and I'll decide. So the medrash says, when you'll meet her? He says, your father says she's perfect. Will you doubt your father? Can you imagine such a thing? Your father comes to you and says, this is the perfect girl. You doubt your father? So says the Medrash Tanchuma, this is exactly the Chet HaMeraglim. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells them the land is beautiful, it's good. And you say, now I want to send spies. Let's see for ourselves. You doubt the Yibam Shalaylam. So it was a sin. That's how the Medrash says. Rashi goes that way. The Ramban says no. The Ramban says it wasn't a sin. Because if you look carefully in the Psukim, the Jews did not say that they want Meraglim because they doubted the beauty of the land, the fertility of the land, etc. The Jews wanted Meraglim because they wanted to know how to conquer the land, what the strategy should be, the entry point, the weak spots, the strong spots, the security. That's why they wanted it. And it says to Ramban that's totally legitimate. Because the Torah never relies on miracles. The Torah always expects we should do things in the natural way. And therefore, it was legitimate. So the sin only came later. When the Meraglim came back with their negative report, that was the sin. But the sending of Meraglim itself was justified. That's what the Ramban says. So many of the commentators ask on the Ramban that there seem to be contradictions from various statements of the Chazal as to the Ramban's basic intention. The Ramban's basic intention was that it was necessary to send Meraglim to plan a strategy for the invasion. The Chazal say in many places that if not for the Chet HaMeraglim, the Jews would not have had to wage war to conquer Eretz Yisrael. They would have walked in, and heaven would have just stepped aside, and we would have taken Eretz Yisrael. Or God would have defeated them miraculously, but it wouldn't have been necessary to wage war. So it seems it doesn't make any sense. The Jews come and say, we want to send spies because we want to know the strategy and the weak points and how to fight, etc. It shouldn't have been necessary, because if not for the Chet HaMeraglim, it wouldn't have been necessary to wage war at all. That's the question that the Mefarshim ask in the Ramban. Comes the Netziv, and the Netziv says both are correct. The Midrashim are correct, and the Ramban is correct. In other words, if not for the Chet HaMeraglim, it would not have been necessary to wage war. Eretz Yisrael would have fallen miraculously. And yet it is true that the Jews wanted intelligence as to how to wage war. Why? Because the Jews did not want to come into possession of Eretz Yisrael that way. They did not want to possess Eretz Yisrael in a miraculous, supernatural way. They wanted to conquer it by virtue of their own military prowess. And that's why they said, let's send Meraglim. We don't want it God's way, we want it our way. Now, why should they want it? If I would tell you, listen, I'm going to give you $1 million, and you won't have to work for it, it'll be yours, you'll enjoy it. And you say, no, I want to earn it the hard way. I mean, it's a very noble sentiment, but like, why? Like, why look a gift horse in the mouth? I mean, you're going to get it effortlessly. Why do you want to have to conquer it? So the Netziv puts it this way. The Netziv says that something that you are given miraculously, you have to be deserving of. If a HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to do nisim for you, you have to be on the madreg, you have to be on the level to be deserving of nisim. And that's a very, very tall order. that the Jews should be on such a madrega, such a level, to be deserving of supernatural miracles, that's very difficult. One small slip up, and you're not deserving anymore. As we see so many stories, you go back, all the stories in the Midbar, before Parsha Shlach. The Jews do a small thing, they grumble about the food, and all of a sudden flames burst forth, and they want meat, and the slav comes, and all the calamities for seemingly slight sins. So the Jews said, listen, that's a consequence. You want to live in that lofty plane, that exalted plane, where God addresses your needs in a supernatural way. You have to be deserving. If you're not deserving, the slightest slip up, that's it. Forget it. So let's do it the old-fashioned way. Hard work, fighting, physical strength. And this way, we're not so deserving. It's ours. In other words, we may not be deserving that God should give it to us miraculously, or we're not so wicked that God will take it away from us. So if God gives it to us with nisim, to maintain it, we have to be deserving. We have to be in a lofty madrega. But if we conquer it with our own strength, so it's ours, fair and square. We conquered it. Maybe we'll commit sins. To make us so unworthy that God would take it away from us, that bad we're not. So therefore, this is the strategy. What's the problem with the strategy? There's a very serious problem. The problem is like this, that if God wants you to do it one way, and you do it the other way, then what is the basis of your claim? Is it legitimate? Is it yours by virtue of law? Or is it yours by virtue of strength? But if God gives something to you, if God says, okay, this is the deal. Now, I'm giving this to you, this is how you're going to take possession of it, so that's God's gift. It's God's gift. And then we have a legitimate claim. If it belongs to God, He can give it to whoever He wants. But if on the other hand, we come and say, we don't want your gifts. No thank you. People who hate gifts prosper. We don't want any gifts. We're going to conquer it ourselves. We'll take it ourselves. So God says, hey, you don't want my gift? Okay. So what is the basis of your claim now? Strength? So are you stronger? Are you stronger or are they stronger? Well, the unfortunate outcome of the story of the Meraglim is first they saw that they are stronger, and then it became painfully obvious when the Mapilim, those people who wouldn't take no for an answer, decided, no, we're going to repent, we're going to go, we're going to fight. And then the Amari came down from the mountain, and now it wasn't just theoretical, now it was practical, down to earth. And it says that they chased them, and they crushed them on Harma to the point of destruction. Yes?
So was their fate actually sealed the moment they decided to send the Meraglim? Like, was it a possibility that all the Meraglim would have come back and given, like, all 10 of them a positive report?
No, this is what the Netziv understands. The Netziv says that it was really, they were doomed. In other words, the starting point, their starting position, their way of thinking in sending the Meraglim, they were making a statement, we want to take it by natural means. Well, by natural means, it was unconquerable. So after that, everything falls into place. Now, the Meraglim weren't so foolish to believe that if God would want to give it to them, that He couldn't. God could do whatever He wants. But we rejected that. We said, we don't want God's gift. We don't want God to give it to us. Right? We want to take it ourselves. So they come back and they say it's unconquerable. And then from there the whole story unfolds.
Isn't there a midrash about the landlord the owner can't defend it?
There's matters like that. I don't know if the Netziv feels he has to go with all the midrashim. I mean, obviously there are some midrashim that disagree with him anyway. But this is how he understands the pshuto of the psukim. And it's an amazing thing. You think about it. In other words, what the Jews were trading in was a claim to Eretz Yisrael, which was legitimate because it's God's gift to us. They said, we don't want that. We don't want it as a divine gift because that is very, very demanding, as the Nesiv says. Instead, we want to take possession of it ourselves, which will be easier as long as we're strong enough. And then we won't need such great schus to be able to hold on to it. But the reality is the exact opposite. That when the basis of your claim is just because of your superior strength, then you have no claim to it at all. And it's just a question of today, who's stronger? Today we're stronger, tomorrow they're stronger. And that's the denouement, that's the outcome of the story. That is the chet of the Meraglim. The chet of the Meraglim is that they wanted a claim to Eretz Yisrael which was rooted in power and strength, and not rooted in Eretz Yisrael being a divine gift. So what is the tikkun? What is the tikkun of that chet? The tikkun of that chet is when you change your attitude to Eretz Yisrael, and you say that I will only accept Eretz Yisrael as a divine gift, and not simply because I'm strong enough to take possession of it. So we have 5 episodes in the Chumash, one after the other, where the Jews are faced with an opportunity to conquer, to fight, and there may even be an expectation of victory, and yet the Jews say, no, we're not doing this because God said no. So first they come to Edom, and Edom refuses to give them passage. The natural thing at that point would have been to fight their way through. And God says, no, don't stand up with Edom. I'm not giving you their land, it belongs to Esau. And the Jews turn away. And they come to Moab. And again, the same issue. They could have beaten Moab. And God says, no, I'll talk to us Moab. Don't fight with Moab. Their land is theirs. They turn away from Moab. Ammon as well. Even Sichon v'Og, where they do successfully fight, you look in the Chumash, it's only after God tells them to fight. They were reticent, but after God says, go ahead and fight, then they go ahead and fight. So essentially, this is really the entire theme of the parsha. That Moshe is contrasting the earlier generation, which fell into the Chet HaMeraglim precisely because they wanted to assert a claim to Eretz Yisrael based on power, by contrast to this generation that wanted to assert its claim to Eretz Yisrael on the basis of a divine gift, which of course is ultimately the only really legitimate claim to Eretz Yisrael. If you don't have an underlying respect for law, if you believe that might makes right, then you can't possess Eretz Yisrael. If the basis of your claim to Eretz Yisrael is rooted in law, which is the idea that, maybe this is something that people aren't necessarily aware of. There's a very serious question. That in law, what gives us the right to property? The first human beings who took possession of the world. On what basis was their possession valid? Just because they were there first? Like, we don't tell our kids that. There's a pie, and the first person that comes grabs the whole pie. And we don't say, no, that's legitimate, because you were there first. What do we tell them? You have to share. Right? The famous joke. There were 2 pieces of cake. The 2 guys sitting there. They were looking for 2 pieces of cake. Finally, one takes the bigger one. The other one says, hey, what are you doing taking the bigger one? He says, what do you mean? You don't take the bigger one. Well, what would you have taken had you chosen first? He says, I would have taken the smaller one. Well, what are you complaining about? That's what you got. Now, what basis? What is the basis of this idea? Now, and philosophers have struggled with this tremendously. John Locke said that legitimacy to possession is because when you blend your labor into the thing, then it becomes yours. So if you take possession of the soil and you cultivate the soil, so you blend your labor into the pre-existing earth, it becomes yours. That was his teretz. So a modern philosopher said, well, let's say I pour a can of tomato juice into the Atlantic Ocean, and the molecules of tomato juice blend into the ocean. Does the ocean become mine? Because I blended my juice into the ocean, or have I just dissipated my juice? Very serious question. Now, the answer, from a Torah perspective, is a very surprising pasuk. Because when God spoke to Adam Harishon, He said, "Pru u'revu u'milu asares v'kivshua." Take possession of it. It was God who was the only owner, said, you have the right to take possession. First come, first served is an argument, at least initially. But after a while, after everything was possessed, so now what happens? What is the basis of ownership? The basis of ownership only is transfer. In other words, the original owners could give it away, they could sell it, barter it, etc. But now the only legitimate basis for ownership is historical. In other words, if I own something, if I possess this hat, you have to trace it back, all the way back, to determine whether my claim is legitimate. If I bought it with money, is my ownership of the money legitimate? And so on and so forth. It's all historical. And you have to go all the way back to the people who took possession at the very outset. If at any juncture there is a transfer which is through force or through fraud, etc., undermines the legitimacy of my claim. So we come to Eretz Yisrael, it has to all go back to the Rilama Shloila. Right? If there's any taking by force, then my claim is illegitimate. But in any case, this is the idea of the Minui Hadayanim. The Minui Hadayanim means a respect for law. That we are going to establish a society in which it isn't power that makes a difference, it's law that makes a difference. Justice. So if you're Mana Dayanim, if you appoint Dayanim, what does that mean? It means you're deserving of the land. It's not just that there is a God, but your claim is legitimate because you've demonstrated respect for law, and therefore you can legitimately protest when someone takes your land through the use of power, and you say, no, that's not right. That's not fair. We don't believe that might makes right. Power doesn't give you the right to take something away. There has to be a historical chain which goes back to the original true owner, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. But if you don't appoint Dayanim, that means you don't have a respect for law. That means, what's the alternative? That it's all a question of power. Well, then you're not going to last too long. Because sooner or later, there'll always be someone stronger than you, and he'll be a big bully, and he'll take it away. So now we understand the parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu is beginning the parsha with the parsha of Minui Hadayanim. And he says that really this is the great schus. This is the great schus that gives us possession to Eretz Yisrael. But you have to understand it. You have to understand it. And you have to live by it. If on the other hand, yeah, you appointed Dayanim, but then you fall into the trap of the Meraglim, which is that you don't want Eretz Yisrael as a legal gift from God. You want to possess Eretz Yisrael by virtue of your conquest, by virtue of your power, then you lose your right to Eretz Yisrael, and that's what happens. The next generation is Masakin Lechet, precisely because in their dealings with Edom, Ammon, Moav, Sichon, and Ari, they demonstrate this commitment to law and not to the use of raw power. Yes?
the tribes that wanted the land east of the Jordan, how do we respond vis-a-vis what you just said?
That's land of Sichon and Og. That was land of Sichon and Og. So that the Torah says that God gave them permission to conquer that, right? Really, that was part of the biblical Eretz Yisrael. There's a Ramban in Parshas Chukas explains this. It's something which isn't immediately obvious. There's really the land of Sichon and Og is part of the Eretz Yisrael that was promised to Avraham. But Moshe Rabbeinu had no intention to conquer it at that time, because since the population was so small, he felt it would make more sense that everyone should live in a more concentrated area west of the Yarden. And then as the population would grow, they would then conquer the lands east of the Yarden. That was the cheshbon. It says when things unfolded differently, and Sichon and Og came out to fight, and God gave the Jews permission to retaliate, so then there was an unexpected conquest of the east, and therefore Reuven and Gad prematurely decided to stay there. And that, of course, is the story that we read in the Torah 2 weeks ago.
Were the cities of refuge then built at that time?
The cities of refuge in Eber HaYarden were built by Moshe Rabbeinu. Were established by Moshe Rabbeinu. Parshas Vaschana, next week's Parsha. Oz Yavdu Moshe Sholosh Arab Eber HaYarden, Mizrach HaShamash. Moshe established the 3 cities in Eber HaYarden. He designated them. Of course, they weren't clay-like. They didn't absorb the Rosh until the 3 there so were established. But Moshe Rabbeinu designated them.
So all 6 were already designated at that time?
No, the 3 were designated by Moshe in Eber HaYarden on the east, and the other 3 were by Yeshua.
Is this an answer why land in Eretz Yisrael reverts back to its original owner in the Jubilee year? You know, because people are selling and buying, but it all reverts back to the original owner. Is it because of this concept that it was this is who was originally given it to by God? Or
I think it's part of that. I think it's a little more subtle than that. The idea is like this: that the chaluk of Eretz Yisrael, the division of Eretz Yisrael, is a divine scheme. It was based on a goyro, right? So the pasuk in Mishlei says that b'chet yutal goyro, that a person casts lots, right? May Hashem kol mishpata, but the judgment comes from Ribono Shel Olam. It's nothing truly random.
right.
Nothing is a random roll of the dice. Because everything is b'hashgacha. So therefore, even the way the goyro comes out is decreed. So therefore, the chaluk of Eretz Yisrael, even though it's on the basis of a goyro, of a lottery, right? It's a function of divine providence. And therefore, every person's share is the portion that God assigned to that person. Now, the truth is this: that as the great libertarian philosopher Robert Nozick said, liberty disrupts patterns. In other words, when people are allowed to act freely, the patterns are all disrupted. In other words, let's say, for example, you wanted to embrace a system of distributive justice, where every person was given an equal share, either simply divided mamash equally among people, or on the basis of need, or on the basis of merit, etc. So you'd have a pattern of division, where there was some level of equality, on some basis, whether it's number, merit, need, everyone has a fair share. Well, how long will that pattern last? How long will that pattern last? After a while, people are going to, start using their shares. Some people will spend, some people will save. After a while, it will be disrupted. I mean, the example he gives is a very interesting example. He says, imagine you had a society where everyone was given an equal share, right? And in this society, Will Chamberlain, I mean, it's a little dated, right? But is playing for the Knicks, and he has an arrangement with his team that anybody that wants to come and watch him play has to pay a quarter into a special pushka, which is by the gate, and otherwise he can't come in to see Will Chamberlain play. Aside from the regular price of admission, but you want to see Will Chamberlain play, you got to pay an extra quarter, put it in the pushka, then you can come in. So over the course of a season, 1 million people want to see Will play, and 1 million people put a quarter in the pushka. So after a very short time, after one season, Will Chamberlain has $250,000 more than anybody else. Now, everyone gave the quarter freely, but it disrupts the pattern of equality. So, as Nozick says, if you are bent on distributive justice, you're going to have to ban free acts between consenting adults. Right? You're going to have to make a law that no, you can't give money, put a quarter in the pushka to see Will Chamberlain play. Right? But this is a reality that freedom does disrupt patterns. Now, in our case, that's exactly the story with Yovel. In other words, the division of Eretz Yisrael is a pattern, right? It's like when Baruch Hu apportioned it, al pi the goyrol. It's a function of divine providence. Every person getting a share, which is his unique share. But it's not a question of no one is forcing anybody, right? In other words, I think there probably are some people that would say that the institution of Yovel is to counteract the aggressive, people that steal land and so. No, you don't have to go into that. Now, even if we'd assume that every sale of land was voluntary and there was no duress, but the pattern of chalukah is disruptive, right? So therefore, every 50 years, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let it revert back to the original pattern, because that is God's plan for Eretz Yisrael, right? I think it's a little different. It's not quite the same thing.
It's not establishing the legitimacy,
right.
like you're saying.
It's totally legitimate. It's totally legitimate if you buy land. You have a legitimate claim to it. We don't suspect that you stole it or forced the person to sell it to you, but it's a disruption of the pattern that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in mind for Eretz Yisrael. But this is the I think the idea of Parshas Devarim, the idea of the supremacy of law, of justice, and this is the basis of our claim. When we succumb to that temptation to legitimize our claim on the basis of might, then we lose it, because there'll always be someone stronger. So if we take it on the basis of might, how do we stand in the way of someone? Some people would say that it works this way, that once upon a time we were morally compromised, so we used to justify takings on the basis of might, right? But now that we've become moral, right, so now we don't do that anymore, so we let everything stay where it is right now. Everything is frozen in the current position. That hardly seems to be a moral stance, right? If you've repented, just to give an example, right? There's a lot of tshuva, right? The person does tshuva. So what's the aleph beis of tshuva? If you stole something, you got to give back what you stole. You can't say, well, then stealing wasn't objectionable, so I have the right to keep it. Now I've changed my mind, so I've done tshuva. I'm not going to steal anymore, but I'm still going to keep what I stole. You can't do that. The aleph beis of tshuva is the heishav exel. You have to give it back. So if we are so noble today, and we say no, that might doesn't make right, so why don't we give it back to California to the Indians and Mexico, Spain, or whatever? But we don't say that. Yeah.
How do you said that, of course, that they had there may have been a noble understanding that they don't want to take something, would rely on miracles.
No, that's not a noble thing at all. That's not a noble thing at all. It was a pure according to the state of calculation rooted in self-interest. They said a very simple thing. To deserve miracles, you have to be on a very lofty spiritual level. It's very hard to maintain that level, right? If you take something naturally, you only have to be righteous enough that you don't deserve God taking it from you. That's easier to do, right? So therefore, why should we accept Eretz Yisrael as a supernatural gift, which demands that we stay on a very lofty madrega to keep it? Let's conquer it ourselves, and then we can keep possession of it, even not being so deserving.
But in general, we don't rely on miracles.
No, it's something else. We don't rely on miracles for two reasons. One is because we don't want to be matriach God. We don't want to inconvenience God, whatever that means. The Gemara says in Tainus. And number two, because maybe we're not deserving. Okay? But God here says, listen, I'm ready to give it to you. I'm ready to give it to you.
You could rely on it.
So God is saying rely on me. So what we're saying, no, but I don't want to rely on you because that means I'm going to have to be good. All right? We have to be good. In other words,
But isn't might
to say I have to be good now, right? Maybe I'm not good enough. But if I'm good enough now, what are you worried about? Because I'm going to have to stay good? Well, I want to have the option to be not so good in the future. It would be hardly the thing you'd want to prepare for.
How could they divorce might, though, from God? I mean, if they thought they were mighty, so they could go in on their own strength, didn't they know that their strength came from God? Like, if God didn't want them to be mighty, they would have no might.
No, they're saying no.
That's
That's only from God. They're saying that a supernatural gift is different than something we take naturally. Of course, if you say naturally, you're also doing it with your God endowed talents. That's true, right? You don't need the schus to keep it as you do when it's a supernatural gift. If a God does a miracle for you, you need bigger schuyas to maintain possession.
Right.
If you have certain talents, okay, true they were given to you by God, but at this point you are in possession of them. So if you use the talents which you already possess to conquer something or to achieve something, so you only have to be good enough that God shouldn't take it away from you. It doesn't have to be such a big merit, right? You're a muhzik, you're already in possession of it. Right?
Was it clear to them that it was going to be a miraculous conquest?
That was in the starting point. The Mefarshim asked the question on the Ramban. The Ramban says, why should they want to seek intelligence as to how to conquer the land naturally? I think Midrashim tell us it would have been supernatural. So Tziv says both are true. It would have been supernatural, and they still wanted to conquer it naturally. Why? Because of this calculation. In other words, if not for the Chet HaMeraglim, it would have been a supernatural conquest. That's exactly what they didn't want.
So where can Midrashim learn that it would have been miraculous? Because it doesn't say in the Torah explicitly that God had a miraculous. Because we always understand that once they entered Eretz Yisrael, everything would be working on a natural basis, like farming and so on, as opposed to the
again, there's two different things. One is all the psukim that say that are really going after the Chet HaMeraglim. So we don't know what it would have been before the Chet HaMeraglim. But there's also a different question. The question is, of course, the existence in Eretz Yisrael would have been natural. It would have been farmers, it would have planted, and it would have grown, and so on and so forth. But the conquest of Eretz Yisrael would have been different.
I still don't. I'm listening to what you said, and it makes perfect sense to me. Isn't it an illusion that they would conquer it naturally? I mean, after all their experiences in the desert, okay, we're going to go out and conquer it. God's not involved with this now. We're doing it. That they wouldn't have a debt to God, for the land.
Of course, they have a debt to God, but that's the difference. The difference is look. Let's just think of it this way. There are two ways to achieve something. You can achieve something through a open public miracle, or you can achieve something through your own effort. Now, your own effort obviously means you're using a God-given talent. But still, we all intuit that you need more merit for the miracle than for the natural achievement, right? Even though, in a sense, both are from God, but that's the difference in a miracle and something which is natural. Something which is b'derech hateva doesn't require the same merit.